Roy Rogers' daughter opens up about his life. Roy Rogers, also known as King of the Cowboys, is the epitome of country music and westerns and has influenced many stars today. Roy played country music throughout most of the 1930s and performed in numerous films in the 1950s and 1960s, and he's considered an icon today. Here's a look at Roy's life over the years, and you might learn something about the country western star. Roy's early life. Roy's early life was very humble. He was born Leonard Sly on November 5, 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His father's name was Andrew or Andy Sly, and his mother's name was Maddie Womack, who became Maddie Sly when she and Andy married. His family lived in a small apartment on 2nd Street, the street the Riverfront Stadium would be built on years later. Shortly after the country western star was born, his father decided to make changes in his family's life, which would benefit Roy later in life. Leaving the city. Andy wanted something better for his family than city life, and the family packed up and left. Andy and his brother Will built a 12-foot by 50-foot houseboat out of salvage lumber and sailed up the Ohio River to Portsmouth, Ohio. When the family arrived in Portsmouth, they purchased a piece of land and planned to build a house. Sadly, the Great Flood of 1913 forced them to live on the houseboat for a few more years. Roy spent most of his early childhood on the boat. Loving horses. The Sly family left Portsmouth in 1919 to Duck Run and lived on a farm outside Lucasville, Ohio. Andy took a job at a shoe factory in Portsmouth and only came home on the weekends, and he always brought gifts for his family. Roy's favorite gift was a horse, and he learned the basics quickly. Country western star loved horses, and his father's gift helped Roy become a real western star, although he and his family didn't know it then. Roy was born to perform. Roy grew up on a farm in a rural area, and there was very little entertainment because the family didn't have a radio to listen to. His family often invited neighbors over for square dances, and Roy was the star. He'd sing, call the dances, and play the mandolin. Roy even learned to yodel during this time. Performing as a child helped Roy discover his love of entertaining. High school. Roy was known as Len Sly when he entered high school in McDermott, Ohio. Roy was smart and a good student, but never graduated from high school. After the singer's second year in high school in 1927, the family moved back to Cincinnati. Roy knew that his family needed financial help, so rather than attending high school in Cincinnati, he got a job with his father working at another shoe factory. The country western superstar wanted to finish high school, so he worked during the day and went to school at night, but it was too much for him. Roy fell asleep in class often, so he gave up on finishing high school and focused on helping his family. The legend begins. Roy's family didn't stay in Cincinnati long and moved a few times before settling down in Inglewood, California. California provided more opportunities for Roy, and he appeared on a radio show called Midnight Frolic. A local music group, the Rocky Mountaineers, heard Roy sing and yodel, and he caught their attention. Roy joined the group, and they toured around several states and played on radio shows and in local bars. Later, they changed the name to the O-Bar-O Cowboys. The group found some success and furthered Roy's passion for entertaining. Roy's first marriage. Roy went to buy a Palomino colt named Golden Cloud in 1932 when he met Lucille Ascalese. She always admired Roy as an entertainer, and the singer changed the horse's name to Trigger and married Lucille in 1933. It wasn't long before the couple realized they weren't right for one another, and they jumped into marriage too quickly, and things went sour. The couple decided it was best to call it quits in 1936. Roy's second marriage. Roy's failed first marriage didn't scare him away from marriage forever, and he met Grace Arlene Wilkins in 1933. He was touring with the O-Bar-O Cowboys and met his future wife in Roswell, New Mexico. She called into the radio show and promised to bake Roy a pie if he sang the Swiss Yodel. Roy did what Grace asked, and the two stayed in touch. When Roy's first marriage ended, he and Grace started dating and were married in June 1936. The tour ends. Roy hoped he would get his big break while touring with the band, but things didn't work out. Many artists struggled to succeed, and Roy was no different. He toured with the Cowboys and they were fairly popular, but sadly, things ended. When the Great Recession hit, people didn't have the money to go to concerts, and their tour ended in complete failure. The band broke up in 1933, but Roy's passion for entertaining only grew stronger. The Pioneers Trio. Roy couldn't give up on music, so he started another band when the Cowboys broke up. He teamed up with Tim Spencer and Bob Nolan, and the three formed the Pioneers Trio. Later, Hugh Fair, a fiddler, joined the band, and his voice added some bass to the group. There were no longer three band members, so they changed their name to Sons of the Pioneers. They knew they weren't old enough to be pioneers, so they called themselves the Sons of the Pioneers. Finding success. Roy found success in music, and Sons of the Pioneers became very popular. By the summer of 1934, the group's popularity spread beyond Los Angeles, and the group's star was on the rise. They signed a record contract with Decca label the same year, and it was a dream come true. Sons of the Pioneers were doing great and helped pave the way for Roy to get into films. The group had a few parts in movies and background character roles, but Roy stood out and landed a few small parts in Hollywood on his own. The beginning of his film career. Roy took his entertaining career seriously and slowly moved into the film industry, starting in 1935. In the beginning, he had supporting roles and got his big break in 1938. Roy auditioned for a singing cowboy star for Republic Pictures and got the part. Country western star made his debut in the 1938 film Under Western Stars. The movie was a hit and paved Roy's way to Hollywood. Roy left the band. Roy found great success with the Sons of the Pioneers and remained friends with Hugh Farr, Bob Nolan, and Tim Spencer throughout his life. When Roy's acting contract began to complicate things for the band, Roy left, but his bandmates understood. The group had a contract with Columbia Pictures to appear in a few films, but Roy wanted to take his acting career seriously, so he said goodbye to Sons of the Pioneers for good. Adopting a child. Roy and Grace were happily married and in love. Sadly, Grace found out she couldn't conceive a child, and the couple was devastated. Roy and Grace refused to give up on the idea of having children, and in 1941 they adopted Cheryl Darlene Rogers, who they loved as if she were their biological child. Another child. The doctors told Grace she couldn't have children, and the couple was shocked when Grace got pregnant. Turned out the doctors were wrong, and the loving mother found out she was pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, Linda Lou Rogers, in 1943. Grace got pregnant again in 1945 and gave birth to the couple's first son, Roy Jr., in 1946. Sadly, Grace died a few days after Roy Jr. was born due to complications, leaving Roy widowed and devastated, and he had to care for his three children on his own. Finding love again. Grace's death hit Roy very hard, and he didn't know what to do without her. She was the love of his life for over a decade, and he was determined to raise his children on his own. Roy met Dale Evans on a film set in 1944, and the pair reconnected after Grace died and developed feelings for one another. The feelings turned to love, and the couple got married in 1947 and remained together until Roy died in 1998. A crazy wedding day. The couple got married at a ranch in Davis, Oklahoma, but it didn't go off without a hitch as they had hoped. There was a snowstorm on the wedding day, and the minister had to ride on horseback to the wedding, which made him late. When he got to the altar, Dale was shocked when Roy wasn't there. She had no idea that a fire broke out in a second-floor bedroom, and Roy and his brother were busy putting it out. She stood at the altar alone for several minutes, and it was a story the couple had loved to tell for years. Making it big in film. Roy started making a name for himself in 1938, and things only improved. He was one of the biggest advocates of the Western genre, thanks to his natural talent for music and unique charisma. He starred in popular movies such as Son of Paleface and King of the Cowboys, and was the most sought-after actor for Westerns for over 10 years. Eventually, legends like John Wayne and John Ford came along, expanding the Western genre. Roy was a good businessman. Roy wasn't just a talented entertainer, but also a savvy businessman. Roy knew what he was worth, so he ensured his contract would preserve the rights to his name, voice, and likeness. This smart move earned him a lot of money in merchandising. There were Roy Rogers comics, toys, and action figures. And Roy received all the profits thanks to the addition to the contract the performer signed in 1940. Cutting ties with Republic Studios. Roy's first acting contract was with Republic Studios, and he was offered the lead in Under the Western Stars in 1938. His career with Republic Studios was a success, but he wanted to move to television, and the studio refused to let that happen. The studio started trying to make TV shows out of his films, but since Roy had the right to his name, he was able to stop them. Republic Studios dropped the star from the contract, which turned out better than Roy expected because The Roy Rogers Show was born shortly later. The Roy Rogers Show. Roy was ambitious, and after becoming successful in radio and film, he focused his attention on television. The Roy Rogers Show was a Western series, and Roy played a cattle rancher who brought justice to the city. The actor was the Western version of Batman, and the show ran from 1951 to 1957 and still has a 7.2 rating on IMDb. Roy's wife, Dale, and his horse, Trigger, were also in the show, and people loved it. Fame. When The Roy Rogers Show was at its peak of popularity, the fan mail poured in. For a time, he received over 78,000 fan letters in a month. And there were even fan clubs dedicated to his horse, Trigger. Roy was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and received 3 stars for his work in radio, television, and film. In 1983, Roy was awarded the Golden Boot, and in 1996, he received the Golden Boot Founders Award. In 1967, the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum was set up and included all the memorabilia collected by Roy and his family. Dale's daughter opens up. Roy Rogers' daughter opens up about his life, and Cheryl wrote the book Cowboy Princess: Life with My Parents, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. She described what life was like growing up with her famous family and how well Dale did when she stepped into the role of the children's stepmother. In the book, she talks about how she and her 8 siblings, many of whom were adopted, appeared with their parents on commercials and variety shows. She even had a speaking role in her father's 1950 film, Trail of Robin Hood.